So the latest on Dorian, right now, Category 5 hurricane. This is moving through the northwest Bahamas. You can see in this area right here around Grand Bahama Island. This is a look at the infrared imagery. Now this camera here, this satellite takes pictures every 1 minute. So you get really good resolution and you can really see how the storm is moving. And again, surprise, the storm is really not moving. Zoomed in, moving 1 mile per hour. So here's a look at the eye over Grand Bahama Island. Now keep in mind, this is a Category 5 hurricane. If you've seen any of the photos, any of the videos that are kind of circulating on social media out of Abaco Island near Marsh Harbor, anywhere in the Bahamas, absolutely horrifying stuff. It's horrifying. Again, they're seeing, they saw max winds of 185 miles per hour. This was the second strongest landfalling hurricane in the Atlantic Basin, and gusts in excess of 200 miles per hour. The storm was moving less than 10 miles per hour the whole time through Abaco Island, and the storm surge, some of those videos again showing water levels 18 to 23 feet above normal tide levels. And this is a very low-lying island, so you have areas that are dealing with the water. You got heavy rainfall and those winds in excess of 200 miles per hour, pretty much wiping the island clean. It's unbelievable, the damage out of there. Again, one death reported, but there is a number that's starting to climb of missing people, and Grand Bahama Island has been in it. They've had spots that's been inside. This is a loop over 6 hours, to put this in perspective. You got spots on the island where the mouse is. They've been inside the eye of this Category 5 for more than 6 hours. 7, 8 hours. They've been in this very lull, eerie calm inside and then surrounded by 200 mile per hour winds. It's unbelievable what this storm is doing. Here's the latest track from the National Hurricane Center released at 8 a.m. So you see these stats: max winds at 165 miles per hour, max gusts at 200 miles per hour. This is the biggest eye-opener. Again, this is a Cat 5. This is as big as it gets. It's moving west at 1 mile per hour. So you have folks on Grand Bahama Island that are sitting in the eye wall where you have those strongest winds, and it's not changing. Imagine Hurricane Michael. This is kind of a good baseline for a lot of us folks locally, because if you've driven over towards Panama City, if you've driven west down I-10, if you lived here in that time, you saw what a Category 5 hurricane can do. And that one was moving quick. So imagine a hurricane even stronger than Michael, okay? Stronger than Michael, and instead of moving quickly up the coast, causing that damage, it's literally sitting still. Your storm surge is going to be much worse. Again, 18 to 23 feet above normal tide levels. You have buildings that are underwater, and they don't really have anywhere to escape. So, can't really fathom the damage that's happening there as we speak, and the damage that has happened in the past 24 hours. Once communication gets back up, we'll be getting a lot more images, videos. You'll be seeing that all over Facebook and Twitter. But just to give you an idea, again, Michael was bad. It was real bad. This is going to be something totally on a different level, which is unbelievable. So we're looking at Dorian tracking up the coast. And again, this track is really, really important right up the I-95 coast. As a couple miles west, a couple miles east, is going to have a huge impact on what happens up and down that I-95 corridor on the East Coast. So we can kind of take it day by day here. Tomorrow morning, look how far it's going to move. It's going to go from here where it is on Grand Bahama Island to the other end of it near Freeport. This thing is going to crawl for the next 24 hours, which is bad for the Bahamas. Now, the earlier we start seeing this northern turn, the better chance we have at avoiding those impacts on the east coast of Florida. So here we go. The track of the National Hurricane Center, it's not very far offshore. Again, 20, 30 miles west, then you have that whole area up and down 95 seeing major hurricane force winds. 20, 30 miles to the east, then you're pushing all those hurricane force winds offshore, and we're only seeing tropical storm force winds down the I-95 corridor. So again, there's going to be a lot of kind of uncertainty, and this is going to be something that we have to nowcast as models are getting in better agreement, kind of focusing right up and down this National Hurricane Center track. So this is something that we need to continue to monitor, and it's going to ride right up that coast. Now, this storm, again, it's going to be dangerously close to the East Coast. I actually am from the Space Coast area, and I got the mandatory evacuation call. I got the mandatory evacuation text through my phone. So they are undergoing all those mandatory evacuations, especially east of US 1 up and down A1A on the barrier islands. So those folks are getting out. And if you are watching this from South Central Florida, today's the day that you got to be completed with those preparations. You have to be on your evacuation route. You got to be getting out. If not, it's time to hunker down and get ready to weather the storm. Because again, there's no more time after today. All that stuff should be complete. So we're going to be keeping our eyes on that. There are a handful of advisories, watches, warnings in effect up and down the east coast of Florida. You got hurricane warnings, of course, where that's already going through in the Bahamas. You got the hurricane warnings up and down the Space and Treasure Coast. South Florida tropical storm warning. Again, this storm doesn't really lose latitude with time. It's going to gain latitude. So it's not moving south. It's moving north. No sound again. Are you guys all getting that? I'm seeing a couple more comments coming in with no sound. So I'm going to try to get that fixed for you. Lost sound. Okay, I see you. Let me try to get this repaired for you. I don't know why some of you guys can still hear me. So I'm going to continue to do this. If you guys can hear me, just let me know. Dorian, it does have all these tropical watches, warnings, tropical storm warnings in effect. And again, it's not going to lose latitude with time or go south. It's going to go north. So the people up and down the Space Coast, up towards the First Coast, and then once you head through Georgia and the Carolinas, that's where you have a better chance for direct impacts from a hurricane as it does right up the coast. Again, we used this graphic a lot for you last week, and this is locally speaking for the Big Bend. And the worst case scenario was Dorian getting into the Gulf. We're kind of wiped that off the table. Dorian's not going in the Gulf anymore, so our impacts really going to be minimal locally speaking. Our forecast will be dry. It will be hot for Tallahassee. Again, we're going to wrap around the backside of this. We're not going to be seeing any hurricane force winds in Tallahassee, any tropical storm force winds in Tallahassee. Might be a little breezy for areas east of Tallahassee, closer to I-75. I do appreciate you guys also commenting. Let me know the sound is working. That's good. Again, I can't hear myself on the other end, so I need you guys to let me over. But let's get to this. This is something that we're going to look at for 1 second. The tropics are busy. Of course, we have Dorian, a Category 5. Look at what else is going on out in the Atlantic right now. You have 4 other areas of interest. Now, again, it's September, okay? It's September. This is getting to the climatological peak of Atlantic hurricane season. So you got 2 waves off the west coast of Africa. This one right here, 20% chance to develop. Again, weeks away, not an issue. This one here, 80%, but this is working north quick out in the middle of the ocean. This one is going to be a fish storm. This might impact Bermuda, and then this little area is down off the east coast of Mexico. A couple areas. It's going to be busy here over the next couple of weeks here in the Atlantic, but what we're paying attention to right now is Dorian. Locally speaking, if you live west of Tallahassee, impacts will be felt mostly through the middle of the week, but they're minimal. Again, we're going to be wrapped around the backside of the storm with lots of dry air moving in. You might have a couple breezy winds, but it's going to be hot. It's going to be sunny. If you live east, we're going to be seeing better rain chances for today and tomorrow. Just some scattered showers and storms. Might be a little breezier, but at the same time, impacts will be minimal. So we got a lot more people joining now. Let's kind of go back to the start and run it back. And guys, if we are living up here in our coverage area, North Florida, South Georgia, unless you're east of I-75, closer over to Jacksonville, we are going to be fine. The storm is looking to stay far east enough where our impact is going to be minimal. It's actually doing the opposite for our local forecast. We're going to be hot and sunny all week, guys. We got 96s, 97s on our forecast. So as this dry air wraps around the backside, Dorian's having kind of the opposite effect, keeping us with drier air. So humidity will be a little lower, but that dry air tends to warm up and cool off more efficiently, which is going to lead to hotter high temperatures above normal, cooler low temperatures, upper 60s, lower 70s. So let's get back into Dorian. Latest on Dorian, that update came out an hour ago. They're pushing them out every hour, so in 7 minutes we should know some more. We are looking at a Category 5 hurricane, max winds of 165 miles per hour. And look at it right now over Grand Bahama Island. It's barely moving. This is 6 hours, a 6-hour loop. Again, barely moving, and it's not going to move much in the next couple hours. It's essentially stalled out. It's moving at 1 mile per hour. You can walk faster than that. So for a storm, again, on this scale, this magnitude, to only move that slow, it's incredible, the lack of steering flow, and that is also incredible, the destruction that it is bringing to areas in the northwest Bahamas. So Freeport, they're going to be seeing these hurricane force winds, Category 5 force winds, for the next 24 hours. And along with that, storm surge from the National Hurricane Center, 18 to 23 feet above normal tide level. That's unbelievable. And again, we had Hurricane Michael. This is kind of what I'm comparing it to. It's our baseline for the folks who live here up in North Florida, South Georgia. You know what Michael did last year. That was a Category 5 hurricane as well. And some things to consider. Michael was moving quick. This storm is stronger than Michael, and this is sitting on top of it. So imagine if Michael sat still right near Panama City for 24 hours. Again, it's hard to believe that the impact could have been worse. But this is likely what we're going to be seeing, something worse. So if you guys have questions, I remind you to shoot them in here. We got one there. Is there a chance the north turn won't happen? The north turn will happen. It's all a timing thing and a matter of when we see this north turn. So the sooner it turns north, the better for Florida. That means the impacts will be lower. The further offshore Dorian is, the lower the impact, the lesser the wind speeds are, the lesser the storm surge, the lesser the rain. The later it takes the north turn, and the closer it gets to the coast, even again, landfall, that's not off the table up and down the east coast of Florida. The later it takes that turn, that means that you're going to be seeing that hurricane force wind field further inland. So folks up and down the 95 corridor will get higher impacts from storm surge, from wind, and from rain. What happens if it continues to move west when more Georgia get hit? Yeah, so again, let's take a zoomed in look here at the cone over the next couple of days and kind of try to break down what each side of the cone would mean. Again, right up the middle, this keeps Dorian offshore. This is kind of a best case scenario for the East Coast, as offshore is good. You still might see those hurricane force winds. Folks are going to lose power. You're going to see damaging storm surge, but we don't want this to make landfall. If we go to the left of the cone here, the later the turn Dorian makes north, the better the chance we have at seeing a landfall here in Florida. Now, it's still expected to gradually weaken over time, but not by much. It's still going to be a major hurricane. And actually, the 9 a.m. advisory just came out. You can see that time. It looks like gusts, movement, max winds, still the same. So no major changes here every hour just to pop out anything new, updates with the tracker or anything, but it does look similar. What should Live Oak expect? Breezy winds through Tuesday, Wednesday, maybe some stray showers, minimal impacts. No concerns for us here. Again, if you're in the local area, Tallahassee, South Georgia, don't need to worry about getting that readiness kit. Don't need to worry about evacuating. We're going to be fine. We're going to be hot, dry, and sunny this week. This is for our coastal folks on the I-95 corridor, East Florida, all the way from South Florida, Central Florida, up through North Florida. This includes Georgia and the Carolinas as well. We're trying to keep this kind of localized for you. But the further west the storm goes here, the better chance you have at seeing a major impact. Tallahassee won't be affected. Mariah, no, we are not going to be affected by this. We might see some breezy winds Tuesday, Wednesday. It's going to be hot, dry, and sunny, our local forecast. Again, being on the west side of Dorian so far away, we have kind of the opposite impact. We're going to be getting on the back side of that circulation, and that's going to be tapping into some dry air. Remember, hurricanes rotate counterclockwise, so imagine Dorian off here just east of Jacksonville. When you wrap around from the north, we are going to be seeing that drier air, and that means lots of sunshine in our forecast, low rain chances, and dry air. If you don't know, it does efficiently warm up and cool off air better, so we're going to be seeing some hot temperatures. In our 7-day forecast for Friday, end of the weekend, we got temperatures in the upper 90s. So it's going to be hot, but you don't need to be concerned if you do live in Tallahassee. Things are going to be more on the quiet side. The biggest impacts will be felt for those areas that are under coastal watches, warnings, and advisories. And you have this up and down the Space Coast and the Treasure Coast. This is going to be a hurricane warning. It means hurricane conditions are expected. And again, those are warnings, but they're all coastal. They haven't spread further inland yet because the National Hurricane Center is not forecasting a landfalling storm from Dorian here in Florida. But it's still possible. It's still in that cone of uncertainty. It's always important to pay attention to the entire cone. As you can see, the center of this storm, anywhere in the cone, that's based off historical uncertainties and those probabilities from the National Hurricane Center. So let's take it zoomed in here on Florida. Again, you can see the eye of Dorian here up through 95 into Central Florida. You can see the eye of Dorian here, way offshore. That would be ideal. Is Jacksonville going to see bad effects either way? Jacksonville, a little iffy. Again, some models still indicating an East Coast landfall, maybe up through parts of the first coast. So if we did see Dorian go maybe a further left towards the cone and ride inland up through maybe Daytona Beach, St. Augustine, Jacksonville, then yes, Jacksonville folks probably going to be put under those advisories again. I am from this area down in Brevard County, and I got the text and the call to my phone telling me mandatory evacuation is underway for areas on the Barrier Islands. So folks are doing that today. If you do live up on the East Coast, today's the last day. Again, this is kind of the fourth quarter. Those preparations should be completed by now. If you're evacuating, today should be the day that you do it. Here in the coming days, as Dorian starts to approach the coast, then we're looking at those potential impacts. Valdosta, Sharon, no concern. I got good news for us here. Again, locally speaking, Tallahassee, South Georgia, not much of an issue. We're going to be seeing maybe some breezier winds over the next few days, but we're going to be on the good side of that circulation, and what that means is dry air working in from the north, and we're going to be nice and sunny. Got real low rain chances in our local forecast. How many miles wide is the storm right now? So those hurricane force winds do extend a good bit out. The eye of the storm about 25 miles wide. If you take a really zoomed in look, you can see this is about 25 miles. And there's been folks trapped inside the eye of the storm for more than 6 hours, 6, 7, 8 hours. What caused it to stall out to a crawl, Chelsea? So what hurricanes are kind of controlled by is a steering flow. So they're patterns in the upper level atmosphere that influence the direction that these storms go, and it has a lack of a steering flow. So essentially nothing in the upper levels of the atmosphere for the next 24 hours are really doing anything to Dorian. So that's why it's just kind of stalled out. It's moving 1 mile per hour right now. We can walk faster than 1 mile per hour. That's how slow it is, which is pretty incredible to think that a system on this magnitude, on this scale that's so enormous, it can be moving that slow. But it is, and that is not good for the folks in the Bahamas. Again, people here in Freeport, Western Grand Bahama Island, they have been in the eye wall, even worse, of a Category 5 hurricane for hours on end. And they're going to continue to be in there for hours as Dorian slowly treks west, because Dorian is barely moving in the next 24 hours. You can see here as the track kind of advances, this is the better one. This can do it kind of track by track, day by day. Here you are. This line right here, that first little icon that popped up, that is 2 a.m. tomorrow. So less than 24 hours, but that's a long way away, and it's only moving to Freeport. Let me see what is causing the extraordinary lightning in the eye with this one. That is actually a sign of strengthening. So there's been incredible lightning inside the eye wall of Dorian pretty much throughout its lifespan, and that has been, again, showing that intensification process. Dorian really ramped up in a hurry. You got really deep, warm water from the bottom of the ocean up to the surface. It's all warm, so that is like fuel. Again, like diesel fuel, and this thing is blown up. How will it affect Fort Lauderdale? So that's still a little iffy. Again, it depends on when Dorian makes that turn. So the most likely scenario, I think, for Fort Lauderdale, you're going to get gusty winds. You're going to get these squalls that push through. Most likely tropical storm force winds, maybe weak hurricane force winds, but I think that since Dorian is kind of already up a little further north, that's keeping areas like Miami and South Florida in the clear, Dorian isn't going to lose latitude. So Dorian's not moving south. Dorian, if anything, is going to move north, west, east, but south off the table. So Fort Lauderdale kind of right there. Again, if it does wait late to make that turn and stays on the left side of the cone, again, you have to pay attention to the entire cone. If that eye makes it all the way and it waits to turn, then you could see hurricane impacts. But for Fort Lauderdale, tropical storm, more likely. So let's say we got some more questions coming. Again, if you guys do have questions, I'm trying to answer these. I'm watching this as well. Flooding concern for Wakulla, Franklin, Swanee, Taylor. Good news, our rain chance is extremely low for the rest of the week. Again, we're on the good side of the circulation. This is kind of our best case scenario locally, and we have a very drier forecast, just a few showers, but not anticipating flooding to be any issue, even for those areas down towards Wakulla, Franklin, Swanee, Taylor counties that have seen heavy rainfall. It's not going to be anything widespread or too heavy. So if it's delayed and slowed so much, when does it not turn north, continues west into Florida? What will the effect be? So if it doesn't make that turn, if it does make landfall. So again, pay attention to the entire cone. So worst case scenario, locally speaking, would be if Dorian stayed on the left side of this cone, waited too long to make this turn, made landfall somewhere in Florida, and then tried to maybe get up through north central Florida, maybe into Georgia. Even then, the probability of us locally seeing tropical storm force winds at this point, Tallahassee, 10-20%. we would see some breezier winds, some heavier rainfall. But again, this is kind of the graphic that we used a lot this week to try to convey these uncertainties and potential impacts in a very intuitive sense. The worst case scenario for us would have been if Dorian went into the Gulf. If Dorian went in the Gulf, it would have the potential to re-strengthen and then make a landfall up through the Panhandle. That's not going to happen anymore. We know Dorian's going to make this northward turn. It's not going in the Gulf. So that's good news. There's no worst case scenario on the table for us anymore, because even if Dorian did get to us here in north central Florida, South Georgia, it would have to travel through all this land and it would weaken extraordinarily. So that's not a concern. We could see a weakening tropical system getting up into North Florida, but we're going to see more of that right turn. It's going to kind of stay more towards the coastline. So the good news for us, again, low impact scenario. That's what we're looking at, this low impact. As Dorian's most likely track right now, taking it through the Bahamas, we're going to be seeing it climb up. Let me use this one, the squiggly one. We're going to be seeing it climb up and then off the coast. That's a low impact scenario. It could bring some rain. Now, even if Dorian does make a landfall and then kind of ride up this direction, relatively low. You could see some gustier winds around this area, but we're thinking that since things, again, they rotate counterclockwise, when you get in all this dry air wrapping around the backside of the circulation, that's going to keep us nice and sunny. So we're not really pumping tropical moisture into our region. We're pumping dry air into our region. That's going to lead to abundant sunshine. That's going to lead to some hot temperatures later this week. So Dorian, aside from maybe some breezy winds, isn't going to have any major impacts in the Big Bend, and we're pretty much 99% certain on that. Not going to be a huge issue for us. The biggest issue is going to be for those folks up and down the coastal communities on the east coast of Florida. That does include Georgia and the Carolinas, but the National Hurricane Center is putting these watches, warnings in effect. The biggest threat right now, locally speaking, would be up and down the east coast, mainly from the Treasure Coast up through the Space Coast, the First Coast, up through Jacksonville. And then we're going to see these watches, warnings, advisories continued for areas further north in the coming days. Again, this is a day-by-day basis here, and it's been a very fluid situation in terms of the forecast and what the storm has done. And again, there's always this level of uncertainty when you're forecasting in the tropics, when you're covering hurricanes. You always know they kind of have this mind of their own and they're going to do what they want. So we are getting better certainty and more confidence in the track that Dorian will take, but there still is the slim potential there that we do see the East Coast Florida landfall riding up I-95. And we still have time. There's about 24 hours left till we start to get a little bit of a move on off the East Coast. But for the people who live there, mandatory evacuations are underway today. So if folks are evacuating today, that means that you should have been complete by the weekend with any of those preparations. Again, today you technically still have time if you have any last minute things to get done, but I can't imagine that there's going to be much open, and if so, those store shelves probably going to be swiped clean. So here is the infrared loop of Dorian, and pretty incredible to see. This is over 6 hours. It's barely moving. It's moving 1 mile per hour. We're walking faster than Dorian. So there's been people inside here on Grand Bahama Island, inside the eye of Dorian for 6-7 hours. It's been a nice, eerie calm. Right in that eye wall, you got max winds of 165 miles per hour, gusts upwards of 200. And from the National Hurricane Center, storm surge 18 to 23 feet above normal tide levels. If you've seen any of the videos, any of the pictures circulating on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, wherever it is, it's unbelievable. Okay, the damage has been unbelievable, and I try to kind of compare it to Hurricane Michael, because locally speaking, everyone was impacted by Michael in some way, especially for the people who live further west towards Panama City, up near Mariana, southwest Georgia. The damage from Michael, that was unbelievable. Okay, I've never seen anything like that. This storm one, it's stronger than Hurricane Michael. Those max winds were 185 miles per hour when it made its first landfall. Second, Michael was moving quick. It did its damage and it went on. You combine 18 to 23 feet of storm surge and a storm that just sits in place, those Cat 5 winds sitting on top of you for hours and hours and hours on end. Again, if you're living right around here on the eastern side of Grand Bahama Island, you've been inside the eye wall of a Category 5 hurricane for 6, 7, 8 hours. Communication is going to be down from the Bahamas for a while. The impacts are going to be something like we've never seen before. Okay, we're already seeing some videos come out of Marsh Harbor area, the Abacos. Absolutely horrible. Okay, so this storm is very unprecedented. It's something like the second strongest that's ever made landfall in the Atlantic Basin, behind the 1935 Labor Day hurricane in the Florida Keys. And not many of us were around for the 1935 Labor Day hurricane from the Keys. So again, really, Dorian is just incredibly strong. It's going to make that track real close to the east coast of Florida. So the folks, again, who do live there, the time is now to get out. If you're going to get out, if you're going to hunker down, it's time to hunker down. Locally speaking, again, we live in Tallahassee. You either live in the Big Bend most likely or south of Georgia. If you're watching, our impacts will be minimal. We are kind of on the opposite end. And when you get on the dry side of the circulation of a hurricane like this, it's wrapping in a lot of dry air. And so what that means, our forecast is hot and sunny for this week. You're not going to know a hurricane is that close offshore if you live here. It's going to be toasty outside. We got upper 90s in the forecast later this week. So it's still going to feel like summer outside. But this track is something that we're going to continue to watch for you. Again, lots of interest in this East Coast area. I'm actually from this area, and I've been getting the texts and the calls on my phone. Mandatory evacuations, those are going on right now up and down the Space, Treasure, First Coast, as those people are getting out of Dodge, moving inland. That's the best way you can go further west away from this storm, because the potential landfall is still on the table. Again, that's not the model consensus. That's not what we think is going to happen, but you can't rule that out. There's still a probability of this storm making landfall somewhere up along the east coast, not only of Florida, but Georgia and the Carolinas as well. And that's going to, again, the further west that we track here, up and down the coast, here we are Wednesday, 2 a.m., going right up the Space Coast. The further west of the cone, the higher the impacts will be felt for Florida and the I-95 corridor there. That means that you're going to get stronger winds. That hurricane force wind field will be pushed further onshore. You'll get higher storm surge as the winds kind of directly correlated to your storm surge there, and more rain, heavier rainfall pushed inland. Now, if you go further to the right side of the cone, this is going to be the good area for us. We want to go further east of the cone, because that means that your hurricane force winds are going to be further offshore. You're going to spare a lot of folks inland of this headache of what is Dorian. Again, Dorian's already done enough. We've seen that, but if we can stay towards the right side of the cone, further east, we're going to be good in the state of Florida. Still expect heavy rainfall, especially for the I-95 corridor. They can't avoid that. Wherever Dorian's going on this track, they're only 100 miles offshore in South Florida, and they're already getting those outer rain bands kind of lashing onshore. But it's nothing compared to these folks down in the Bahamas. So if there's any other questions you guys have, feel free to shoot them in the comments before we do take off. I'm going to try my best to do another Facebook Live, probably about the 11 a.m. advisory when that comes out here in 2 hours, just to give you another quick update. I don't think much is going to change, at least in the current path, as again we're kind of in a holding period right here with Dorian, as it's not doing much for the next couple of hours. It's going to be sitting still, kind of parked over the Bahamas. Again, prayers out for all these folks down here in Grand Bahama Island, the Abacos, as they are getting absolutely lashed. Again, if you're just using social media, there's a good chance that you're seeing a lot of that stuff kind of circulating around, videos, pictures coming out of there, and it is incredible footage. How fast will Dorian weaken? This track for you kind of has a good barometer of what we're expecting. By the time it's up towards the Space Coast, it should be down to a Cat 3. And again, we say weaken. We say Dorian's only going to be a Cat 3. A Cat 3 is a major hurricane. If you've ever been around a Category 3 hurricane when it made landfall, again, the impacts are incredible from a Cat 3. So just because this storm will be only a Cat 3 up the East Coast, it's still an extremely dangerous hurricane. That's still a major hurricane. It's nothing to take lightly just because it's weaker or weakened. Again, Dorian had max winds at 185 miles per hour. It has weakened, but it is still leveling the Bahamas right now. So that's not something to take lightly. If you hear that Dorian is going to be weakening over the next few days, if you live on the East Coast, if you live in the Carolinas, and someone tells you Dorian's going to be weaker when it gets near you, tune that out. It will be weaker, but it doesn't matter. Dorian's still going to be an extremely powerful hurricane capable of, again, costing lives. It's already done that, and it's going to continue in its path. So as long as you're prepared for this, you kind of have your plan in place. If you live on the East Coast, the time is to evacuate. If you do that today, be in your place. Today, it's kind of decision day for you if you live on the East Coast of Florida. Evacuate, or you're hunkering down. And whatever you do, be confident in that decision, because you can't leave during the storm. You can't do that stuff. So if you are under a mandatory evacuation, I would suggest getting out if you have a place to go, a place to stay, and those resources to do so. Again, if there are shelters in place, I'm sure you can find that stuff. We have information online about the hurricane. Real quick, if you guys want to see this is, again, it's, what is it, September? We are in the peak of hurricane season. There are multiple areas out there to watch, and we have, again, Dorian. You got an area in the western Gulf, a few in the central Atlantic. There's a lot going on out there. We put that graphic on our social media. It's just going to be a busy time for us here talking about the tropics for the next month or so, and that's okay. Again, it's that time of the year. This happens every year, but right now the only direct threat to, I wouldn't say us locally, but through the southeast U.S. is going to be Dorian. This is that look over the past 6 hours, and it's barely moved. So this is a storm like many of us have never seen before. Again, for the entire Atlantic Basin, second strongest on record. It's stronger than Michael. It's stronger than Katrina, Harvey, Irma, Maria. Dorian is stronger only behind the 1935 Labor Day hurricane in the Florida Keys. Don't think many of us were around when that made landfall. There's no way it's going to turn that hard without how big it is. Yeah, you know, there are still some models that have landfall. Really hoping that, again, it's going to continue this very slow westward crawl over the next day before we see it kind of continue to stall out and slow down and then make a hard north turn. So that's what we're banking on here. Again, fingers crossed that these things, they can do whatever they want, but the model consensus still showing better agreement for it staying offshore of the east coast of Florida. As we see this ridge of high pressure weaken up in the western Atlantic, it's going to give Dorian this escape route that it needs to get away from us. So we're hoping that it takes that escape route off the east coast of Florida. The further to the right of the cone, the better. So that's what we're going to do. At this point, locally speaking, if you're watching from Tallahassee, Live Oak, Valdosta, Thomasville, wherever you are, if we're in the Big Bend, if we're in South Georgia, impact's going to be minimal. Okay, nothing to be concerned about for us. This is going to be for our folks up and on the east coast of Florida that have this major hurricane right offshore, and 20 miles kind of makes or break your forecast, whether you're seeing tropical storm force or major hurricane force winds. So it's going to be really important to pay attention to this track in the coming days, and that's what we're going to do for you. Again, 24 hours, we're still going to be down here in the northwest Bahamas. This won't be changing too much in the next day. The trends will, the track will, but the current storm itself is slowly weakening, but barely, as it's still over lots of water there in that chain of the Bahamas, northwest Bahamas, over Grand Bahama Island right now. So if you have any more questions, you can shoot them in there. I think I'm about to wrap it up for you, and we're going to get ready for the noon show coming up, midday. If you guys want to tune in there, we'll have the latest stuff. I'm going to do another one of these Facebook Lives around 11 a.m., okay, 2 hours from now, and I'll give you all the updates with the latest track and stats there, and we'll, again, talk it out, answer any questions you guys have. Locally speaking, this is not going to have a huge impact on our forecast. We're going to be hot and dry for the week as drier air wraps around the backside of the circulation. For the East Coast, well, kind of jury's still out, depending on where we go from here. So we're going to keep you updated. Again, tune in at 11 o'clock on Facebook here. We'll go live for you and bring you any updates that we got. If you have questions, I'll scroll through, see if I can answer them for you. Hope you have a great morning. We'll be back with you here in a bit with the latest on Hurricane Dorian.